Many are already aware of the bleak state of American higher education. The U.S. spends more per student than almost all its peers, yet comparative academic proficiency studies from the Pew Foundation and others consistently rank us in the middle to bottom rungs. Literacy rates are lower today than in 1840, well before the imposition of compulsory public education. Worse, university campuses have become pedagogic citadels of administrative and cultural wokeism. But what's less understood is the degree to which these same forces have already infested the nation's primary and secondary public schools. From Loudoun County to Cupertino, the K-12 public education system has become subversive to our shared welfare. A vast array of intersecting public and private forces, legislatures, teachers' unions, school boards, curriculum providers, and moneyed special interest groups are working in unison to advance a worldview utterly hostile to past generations of Americans. The evidence for this is everywhere and reveals itself under three interconnecting agencies, what we at Protect Our Kids call the triple threat: sex and gender theory, critical race theory, and replacement parenting, otherwise known as social and emotional learning. Sex and gender theory comes in many guises, but is centered around the separation of biology from one's personal identity. This destructive messaging begins in kindergarten. There, children are exposed to cartoon instructional books like Who Are You? A Kid's Guide to Gender Identity. Teachers tell impressionable young minds, babies can't talk, so grown-ups make a guess about their gender by looking at their bodies. This is followed in later grades with books like My Princess Boy, Jacob's New Dress, and graphical tools like The Gender Unicorn, intended to convey the illusion that chromosomes and body parts don't matter. At the same time, state legislatures are busy passing so-called non-discrimination laws to open school bathrooms according to subjective gender preferences and feelings. Teachers are being ordered to use preferred gender pronouns under threat of dismissal, all of which is meant to cement the lie that biology is irrelevant. Yet an equally dangerous goal of sex and gender theory is to sexualize children. What was once known as sex ed has devolved into comprehensive sexuality education. Teaching tools like It's Perfectly Normal depict realistic graphics of fully exposed child genitals and sex acts. Mind you, this book is meant for 10-year-olds. And this is only one example of an expanding arsenal of similarly corrosive teaching tools. Schools today not only promote child sexuality, they facilitate off-campus sex-related medical services for their minor charges. Under California's Assembly Bill 1184, the first notice parents get that their child has received such sensitive services may be when the bill shows up in the mail. Then there's critical race theory, the now ubiquitous topic of nightly news cycles that galvanized Virginia's parents and kept Terry McAuliffe out of the governor's mansion after he expressed his conviction that parents should leave education to the professionals. These are the same parents that the National School Board Association referred to as domestic terrorists in a letter it wrote to the Department of Justice. Why were Virginia's parents upset? As they soon discovered, CRT is a barely veiled form of Marxism. Class warfare is still the goal, only instead of the bourgeoisie against the proletariat, the conflict now is between the races. In classrooms across the nation, kids are taught to deconstruct their racial identities and, depending on the pigment of their skin, rank themselves according to privilege at one end of the spectrum or oppression on the other. Under CRT, representative democracy and capitalism are tools of white patriarchy. It reminds one of the old Soviet-era joke. The future we know, it's the past that keeps changing. A good example is the widely discredited 1619 Project, which attempts to reframe history, including the Declaration of Independence, the War of Independence, and the Constitution as tools of the oppressor class. Kids are taught that Lincoln was not an emancipator, but a closet racist. Finally, for children whose sensibilities have been whipsawed by the dizzying irrationalities of their progressive betters, there is replacement parenting, or what's formally known as social and emotional learning. Parents may have resigned themselves to schools acting in loco parentis, but SEL takes it to the extreme. Far from being concerned with cultivating traditional notions of character and virtue, the goal of SEL is to mitigate the interrelated legacies of racial and class oppression in the U.S. and globally. It seeks to critically examine root causes of inequity and develop justice-oriented global citizens. Under SEL, schools engage children in woke therapy sessions through topics like social awareness, self-management, and responsible decision-making. As SEL advocate Dina Simmons has put it, what's the point of teaching children about conflict resolution skills if we're not talking about the conflicts that exist because of our racism or white supremacy? But SEL goes even further. It invades the recesses of a child's inner life and records what's discovered there through intimate surveys, family life assessments, and class exercises designed to achieve doctrinal assent to the ever-evolving demands of social justice. What's behind all this? Well, it's not a secret. The purpose of public school education is to indoctrinate future generations into a new orthodoxy, a replacement worldview for the beliefs that informed and animated past generations of Americans. The official name for this worldview is critical theory, and which has its origins in neo-Marxism. Sex ed promoter SIECUS, for example, openly advertises its aim: sex ed for social change. This orthodoxy is demonstrably religious in nature with its own dogmas and practices. Metaphysical claims are supported with appeals to ancestral and even pagan roots. Before its recent challenge in court, California's version of CRT encouraged teachers to guide children in chants to Mayan and Aztec deities. Utterly rejected, of course, is anything at all resembling the biblical worldview upon which all Western culture developed and advanced, along with its derivative concepts, like the nuclear family, liberal democracy, private property, and equal protection under law. If politics is downstream from culture, and culture from people's personal beliefs, then the specter of America's public schools turning into ideological indoctrination camps is a flashing red signal. How long our civilization can survive such intellectual and moral nihilism is open to debate. But as Lincoln famously warned, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. But then again, Lincoln was a racist. But consider this. In 1943, the Supreme Court was asked to decide if public schools could force children to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. This was in the middle of World War II, a time of fervent patriotism. Notwithstanding, and writing for the majority, Justice Robert H. Jackson ruled, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in matters of politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word their faith therein. Perhaps it's time the public schools were reminded of this. But this can't happen unless and until vastly more numbers of concerned citizens begin standing up and asserting their constitutional and God-given rights. Parents, that means you. I'm Mark Schneider for Protect Our Kids.